The story originates from the country's largest port city, Lit. A large ship of adventurers arrives in the harbor bay. A guy comes off the deck of the ship and looks around contentedly. Shouting joyfully throughout the port, the boy in the red cloak can't believe he's finally here. Approaching the guest, the female rabbit offered to purchase the potion, but only after he did him some favors. Also noticing the new visitors, a man in a red bandana offered them to buy his fish at the best price in the market. Throughout the port, there were voices of merchants offering to provide storage for items or to train together. Looking at all of this, the boy in the red cloak was once again convinced that the port city of Lit was simply delightful. As he approached Raymond, a man with long white hair gave him a friendly hug and remarked that his friend appeared to be overjoyed. Dragging the kid behind him, Walker admitted he was excited too. Looking his buddies in the wake, the man in the green bandana said that, in fact, he was so glad to be here that he wanted to tell everyone in this desk how great he felt. And for the most part, it's not just because this port city is incredible in its own right. After all, this is where their long adventure will begin. It is a time when adventurers from all over the world write their own stories of grand journeys. This era is called the Age of Adventure. Gates are mysterious portals that have begun to suddenly appear all over the world. And these gates lead to worlds inhabited by horrifying monsters unknown to humans before. Countless adventurers have died inside the gate. However, the rewards of winning certainly outweigh the risks. This drives ambitious people to keep trying out new worlds. "We need decoys," Walker muttered, looking earnestly at his friends. Hearing these words, Raymond perplexedly asked his buddy what he meant. Then, the white-haired man explained that it was impossible to come up with a strategy before entering the gate, as no one knew what to expect there. Adventurers in many seasons had lost their lives in unforeseen circumstances for this very reason. This is why they have now started hiring decoy slaves. Nodding, Charlotte agreed that taking those who would distract the monsters while the other squad members ran away from the battlefield was a pretty good idea. After discussing all of this, the adventurer squad set out to find themselves suitable bait slaves. After greeting the visitors, the merchant told them that this place is owned and operated by the Gapper Trade Guild. Everyone here is a bait slave. There is a suitable item for every buyer here. Then, laughing, the slave trader added that his goods were guaranteed to repay the adventurers. With his hand pointing to two slaves, the man decided to recommend them to his guests. These two are relatively fresh, as the trader has just received them. After agreeing to the deal, Walker bought two slaves and traveled with a posse to the gate. Placing his hand on the hilt of his dagger, the squad leader told his comrades that the adventurers were leaving marks on the tree trunk, showing how many teams had entered this particular gate. The best part is that the gate that Walker and his team are about to enter has no markings, which means they'll be the first to enter. Leaving a scratch on the tree, the white-haired man turned to his friends and asked if they were ready for this outing. Looking at the gate with anticipation, the rest of the squad suggested that they should start sooner rather than later. Soon, the adventurers, along with two slaves, crossed the portal and found themselves in a strange forest with incredibly tall trees. Once on the other side of the gate, Raymond stumbled and nearly fell to the ground. Looking up, the boy saw something unbelievable. It turns out that in addition to the majestic trees, this forest also had incredibly huge and beautiful mushrooms. Looking around, Raymond realized that he had never been in such a bizarre place before. The atmosphere inside the gate was not what he had imagined. Asking his comrades not to panic, Walker suggested they keep walking. The portal usually opened far away from the monster's lair, so they were safe for now. You can't exit the same way you came in. The squad's priority now is to locate the gate with the exit. While Walker was telling his friends what they should do earlier, Charlotte heard some strange behind her. At the same instant, a horrible monster pounced on her, preparing to tear the girl apart with its huge fangs. Noticing the way this beast attacked their partner, the rest of the squad couldn't understand where the monster came from. However, as it turned out later, the enemy was not alone. Just a few seconds later, the entire team of adventurers found themselves surrounded by a horde of monsters. Realizing the mess they were in, Walker decided to act immediately. First of all, the man grabbed his staff and, using it like a bow, charged an attack with a fiery arrow. Firing a shot at the enemy, the squad leader instantly finished off the monster, thus freeing his wounded friend from its jaws. Turning to his partners, Walker warned that something was wrong here. He then ordered them to tie the decoys to the tree and get out of here immediately. Understanding what the adventurers were about to do to them, the slaves asked to be rescued. But threatening the decoy with a dagger, the tyrant yelled to him to shut his mouth and stand still. Tying one of the slaves to a tree, Raymond cried out in despair that he was sorry. Running away from the horde of monsters, the squad of adventurers could only hear the desperate cries of the decoys, begging not to leave them here. As expected, the two slaves did their job perfectly. The baits attracted all the critters to them, giving the adventurers enough time to escape. As he continued to run, Walker held the wounded Charlotte on his back. With a glance at his companions, the man explained that the task was postponed. They were not in the mood to hunt monsters right now. The first thing to do was to find a way out, and quickly. Meanwhile, Raymond was so frightened by what he saw that he even stopped paying attention to his friend's attempts to shout to him. Grabbing the boy by the scruff of the neck, Theron told the jerk to come to his senses and listen to Walker's instructions. First, they need to calm down. Their adventure completely failed this time, but they can prepare better and try again. It's too early to give up, and so there's no time to lose. Trying to encourage his shrunken friend, the fat man tried to convince him by telling him that together they would definitely survive. In the same second, the monster that suddenly appeared behind his back pressed Theron into the ground with its paw. Seeing his friend being finished off by the huge beast, the squad leader, still holding Charlotte on his shoulder, cried out in despair. When the creature lifted its paw, all the survivors saw that Theron was crushed like an insect. Unwilling to believe what was happening, Raymond, who had fallen to the ground, began to crawl backwards in fear. For his part, Walker wasn't going to accept the death of his friend so easily, and so, screaming in despair, he activated the fire arrow again. But the man never had time to attack his opponent. Abruptly turning around, the monster extended its tongue and tied it tightly around the squad leader's neck. Trying his best to free himself from the grip of the terrible beast, Walker panicked and asked Raymond to save him. In the next instant, the crunch of bones was heard. Shivering with fear, Raymond saw the creature eat his commander alive. Crawling away from the beast in terror, the boy began to call out for someone to save him. But very soon the monster was close by and, mouth wide open, prepared to devour the boy. Tying its tongue around his leg, it pulled the guy's limb into its mouth. Raymond immediately felt an unbearable pain and wailed. While the boy was screaming in pain, a man appeared nearby. Already almost completely drenched in his own blood, Raymond couldn't stop fighting for life and hoping that someone would save him. Suddenly, the guy noticed a man he knew standing in a tree. It turned out to be one of the bait slaves, who for some reason was still alive. Overjoyed that one of the slaves had survived, Raymond held out a trembling hand to him and asked him to help him sooner rather than later. Apologizing for what happened, the guy reminded the decoy that he was against it and didn't want to tie them to the tree at all. Then the boy added that the slave couldn't get out of here alone anyway and they needed to work together. However, no matter how much he begged, for some reason the bait wasn't answering him anything. The blue-haired guy with the slave block around his neck just sat in a tree and silently watched Raymond being chewed on. Looking at the bait in tears, Raymond asked why the hell he was just sitting idly by. If this piece of shit doesn't help him, the boy will die soon. With a smirk, the slave jumped down from the tree and deftly landed on the ground. Looking up, he explained to Raymond that as much as he wanted to, he definitely couldn't help anymore. The thing is, it's too late to help this adventurer. Feeling that the monster had already half swallowed him, Raymond looked hopelessly at the pool of blood right in front of his face. Stupid slave. The boy in the red cloak smiled in despair and muttered. Reaching out to the bait slave in tears, he screamed frantically that the bastard was not destined to survive on his own. One day it would be his turn. The very next second, the monster clenched its jaws tightly, finally swallowing its victim. As Raymond's arm, severed by the beast's fangs, fell to the ground, the creature looked grimly at the blue-haired lad with the spear standing nearby. Preparing to attack the next victim, the beast crouched to the ground and opened its mouth wide. With a lightning-fast burst of speed, the creature sprinted toward the blue-haired boy. Once very close to the guy, it extended its tongue to immobilize its victim, as it had done all the previous times. Surprisingly, however, the slave was incredibly calm. He continued to stand in place and looked at the approaching enemy with a cold-blooded gaze. Carrying the spear behind his back, the blue-haired boy mouthed that he thought he could survive. In just a moment, the guy was already behind the enemy's back, piercing him through with his spear and destroying his core. The monster died instantly, and its already breathless body landed right behind the bait slave's back. Yes, it is. That boy could easily survive here, all because this isn't where he died last time. Past life, 6 years later, current events. As they approached the edge of the cliff, the squad finally found the one they had been searching for so long. There are many winged monsters flying around, big and small, strong and weak. But none of them compare to the one these brave men have come to fight today. Mankind's greatest enemy, the Dragon King Gornthal. The Centauri nest was also destroyed. This means that the squad that came here today has no one else to rely on. From the Knights of Cygnus, the Resistance, the Crusaders and Adventurers, to the 6 heroes that people have pinned their hopes on. All of them are dead and did not live to see the final battle with the Dragon King. There is only one man left who can save the entire species. The latest adventurer, Elpham. And returning to his partners, Elpham said to follow him. As he approached the edge of the cliff, the boy looked tensely at the Dragon King flying high in the sky. That's right, today is their final adventure. A few hours later, the forests are burning with a rapidly spreading fire. The once vibrant valley has become a living hell on Earth. Elpham, finally exhausted, sits on his knees, no longer paying attention to what's going on around him. Around the last adventurer lie the breathless bodies of his comrades, and right in front of the guy lies the bloody corpse of a small dragon with its mouth wide open. Looking up into the sky, Elpham realized that the end seemed to have come. Dragon King Gornthal was flying high in the sky like nothing had happened even after hours of fierce battle. The squad survived a heavy blow, but managed to chop off one head only to see it regenerate again. All their efforts were in vain. And so, now fully recovered, the dragon flew at great speed to kill the last adventurer. Looking at it hopelessly, Elpham resigned himself to his fate. Closing his eyes, the boy already prepared to meet his end. But saddest of all, this is not only the end of Elpham's long adventure, but of the world. However, suddenly the boy slammed his bloody fist on the ground. Lifting himself up, he sent the whole thing to hell. There's no way the guy's gonna let it end this way. Philip died protecting the last adventurer from another dragon strike. Jaden's arm was blown off. This guy couldn't take the massive blood loss and died in Elpham's arms. The last member of the squad was Alesis, who simply could not escape the dragon's huge maw. All of them gave their lives for the victory of humanity. Raising his head, the scarred Elphama shouted that he refused to accept it. Overcome with incredible pain, the last adventurer gathered his strength and got to his feet. Turning his gaze to Gorntail, he promised himself that he would not perish so easily. Extending his arm out in front of him, Elpham took aim at the dragon flying high in the sky. Concentrating all his remaining strength into one spell, the guy decided to end this battle with one shot. This battle will decide the fate and future of all mankind. That's why Elpham will kill this monster, even if it's the last thing the guy gets to do. But very soon, all hope of finishing off Gornthale came to naught. Noticing that the latest adventurer was about to attack him, the Dragon King used supersonic speed to disarm the enemy. Elpham's webbing burst, and the lad himself fell to his knees without strength. At the same time, Dragon King Gorntail finished preparing the final spell. In just a second, the flying monster spewed a powerful stream of purple flame from its mouth. Looking at the inevitable death approaching him, Elpham remarked how pathetic a sight it was. Why did the end have to be like this? If only he had great power. If he could start over again, he certainly wouldn't let this outcome happen. "Get up, you piece of shit!" came an angry voice, and then Elpham felt someone pouring cold water on him. Standing in front of the kid, the man with the bucket in his hand said he was well aware that the brat was healthy. While the bald merchant was telling his stupid bait slave not to forget his place, Elpham was trying to figure out where Gornthale had gone. It wasn't until some time later that it dawned on the guy that he was still alive for some reason. Noticing the pads on his arms and neck, the boy immediately realized where exactly he had gotten to. This is a slave market, and Elpham himself is a commodity here. Trying to catch his breath, he couldn't understand what was going on. This was nonsense. Slave markets were banned a long time ago, but the boy is quite sure that he is not mistaken. Elpham remembers exactly that this is the same merchant who bought it at the market 6 years ago. The boy was already a slave in those days, and this bald man had bought him out for his own use. While the guy was trying to figure out what was wrong, the merchant gave him an annoyed look and asked what the hell he was looking at. Then, without taking his eyes off the fist flying into his face, it finally dawned on Elpham that he had traveled back in time. Now the boy had no doubts. On this day, he returned to the moment when it had just begun. After enduring the slave trader's beatings, Elpham sat down in a corner of the dungeon and began to ponder everything that was happening to him now. On the one hand, it might seem like a normal dream, but the guy is completely sure it's not. The sensations are too real to be just a fantasy. It doesn't make sense, but Elpham just can't find any other explanation. The boy's thoughts were interrupted by a merchant who showed the next group of adventurers his best and relatively fresh slaves. Glancing at Walker, Elpham finally figured it out. He had been given a second chance to avert a world catastrophe. Several hours later, when the adventurer squad had already been completely defeated outside the gate, picking up the calm Walker's weapon, Elpham noted that the Staff of Fire Arrow was a pretty good ability for continued survival. The ability itself isn't all that outstanding, but it's a great fit for the guy right now. Be that as it may, it's still not enough. The adventurer group must have brought other things with them if they plan to farm here. After noticing the severed foot of one of the members of the adventurer squad, the boy decided to check his shoes for valuable items. Some people have a habit of putting expensive things in their boots. Taking the severed leg out of his boot, Elpham pulled out a rather interesting ring from there. It turned out that there was a telekinesis ring in the shoes of the murdered adventurer. While examining the new thing, the boy heard suspicious noises nearby. Turning around, the guy saw many monsters standing behind the trees. They must have come at the smell of blood. Taking his spear in hand, Elpham prepared to repel the numerous attacks of his opponents. Seeing that one of the creatures was attacking him from the back, the guy turned sharply and made a huge hole in the enemy's body with his spear. Meanwhile, one of the monsters reached for the boy with its tongue to try and tie its victim tightly and immobilize him. To avoid falling for this trick, Elpham put his spear in front of him, thus blocking the enemy's attack. However, as expected, this creature's tongue is very powerful, and so it had no trouble breaking the guy's spear. At this turn of events, the slave stood dumbfounded, wondering how he should deal with his enemies next. At the same moment, with its mouth wide open, another monster pounced at him from behind. The guy had just a blink of an eye to grab his staff from behind his back and activate a fire arrow. In one move, Elpham dodged his opponent's attack and burned him through with his staff. Taking a look at the arrow he had just fired, the slave decided to try out something else. Just recently, he had gotten a rather entertaining ring, and so it would be a sin not to use it. Extending his arm, the guy used telekinesis on a fire arrow, then with a circular motion of his hand, he interrupted the monsters surrounding him. Soon, the mana of the fire arrows finally ran out. Looking at the burned corpses of his enemies, Elpham realized that he would definitely not be able to use one arrow for long. And unfortunately, with this rather creative attack, the guy didn't manage to finish off all the monsters after all. It was a shame that he wouldn't be able to use telekinesis for long, but not that it mattered to Elpham. He could create a new fire arrow at any moment, but as the boy pulled out his staff, he noticed something strange. Without activating the spell, the slave bounced out of his seat, dodging the paws of the creatures that had pounced on him. For some reason, Elpham failed to activate the fire arrow. But the staff isn't broken. What happened? Does this weapon have a reload time? After thinking it over, the guy realized that he simply had no other choice. Standing up, the slave began to fight the monsters with his staff as if he were holding some heavy club or sword. Noticing the creature running toward him, Elpham struck the enemy several times in the muzzle with his staff. Finally, the boy kicked his opponent with great force with his foot, gouging out several of his teeth. It was enough to finish off the monster without even using magic. It was also completely enough time for Elpham's main weapon to reload. Hitting the ground with his staff, the guy gathered all the fire energy. Meanwhile, the monsters pounced on him in a pack, preparing to tear the boy to pieces. But it was exactly what the slave expected. Extending his staff in front of him, Elpham unleashed a fiery arrow. Immediately afterward, he decided to use the telekinesis ring once more. Subduing his fire arrow, the guy finished off all the remaining opponents with a few sweeps of his hand. Before he died, Raymond said that a bait slave would surely die alone in this place. I guess he was wrong after all. Looking around to make sure no one was left alive, Elpham heard someone's hoarse voice. Still alive, Charlotte, regaining consciousness, called out to the boy. Coughing, the hooded girl asked the boy if he was an unusual bait slave. Turning around on her, Elpham was surprised that this girl was still alive. She's pretty lucky. Though, considering what would happen next, that statement was incorrect. Charlotte, in turn, looking at the slave with hatred, asked who the hell he was. Where did he get this fighting ability and magic from? Then the girl noticed the weapon of her already dead comrade in the hands of this guy. Why is he holding that staff in his hand? How did he even manage to use it? Where did he get the ring around his wrist? How could a bait slave awaken such powers? It wasn't until some time later that it finally came to Charlotte. This whole anomaly today is because of this guy. As soon as the girl said this, Elpham looked at her with disdain. "Did you finish?" the boy inquired, stepping closer. Looking at him perplexed, Charlotte asked the slave what he was going to do. However, what Elpham is about to do to her now is clearly not going to please this girl. No matter. Even if the other adventurers in her squad were still alive, the guy was going to kill them all anyway. This scum used humans as bait to survive, and the Elpham despised those like her. Soon, having finished with all the business outside the gate, the lad made his way back to the port city. Rumors spread throughout the city in a matter of hours. Even though this fact was confirmed, many residents for a long time could not believe that the bait slave was the only one who had returned alive from the gate. The lot has been cast, and so Elpham needs to act quickly to avoid repeating the same fate as in his previous life. But the boy needs to act consistently and do things in order. First of all, he will get rid of his status as a slave.
Pet the cat.